South Africa is facing a sharp rise in extreme weather events, from destructive floods to powerful storms, and it's getting worse. Now, a study led by Dr. Bopape, the managing director of the South African Environmental Observation Network, takes a closer look at the scale of the problem. The climate and disaster data collected between 1980 and 2023 shows a clear increase in the number and severity of weather-related disasters across the country. The study also finds that human activity, especially rapid urbanization, is making things worse, putting more lives, homes, and infrastructure at risk. Let's speak now to Dr. Bopape. A very good afternoon to you, Dr. Bopape. Thanks very much for your time. Tell us what this study has shown. In other words, what lies behind both the severity and the frequency of these floods, especially in areas like KwaZulu-Natal and now the Eastern Cape.
Good afternoon, Vio, and good afternoon to the viewers of Newzroom Afrika. Thank you for this invitation so that we can share with you the findings from our study. I think the first thing to mention is that to conduct this study, we had to use an international data set that records disasters across the globe. And we had to go with that international data set because we couldn't find a suitable one in South Africa that we could use for this scientific study. So first, we looked at the period 1980 going to 2023. And the main question that we were asking was, where are the disasters being recorded? And basically looking at the data set, what we have found out is that there have been more disasters in the recent past, and I mean the peak in terms of these disasters for the floods specifically happened in 2022, where there were 8 that were recorded according to this data set that we used. It's important, I think, to mention that the data set we used is very specific in terms of specifying what qualifies as a disaster. First, there have to be 10 fatalities as a minimum. So that is one, or there have to be 100 or more people that are impacted by this disaster, or there has to be a call for international assistance. And then the fourth criteria is that there has to be a declaration of a disaster. So one of the 4 has to be met in order for an event to make it into this database. So what we have found out just in terms of the spatial distribution was that there were, at provincial level, KwaZulu-Natal was has reported the most disasters. And then eThekwini municipality reported the highest within the KwaZulu-Natal province. In South Africa, we've got a west to east rainfall gradient. So there is less rainfall in the west. And then as you move towards the east, there is more rainfall. So KZN, as we know it, it's a really wet province. So it does report the most disasters. However, with eThekwini really jumping out, when you look at the whole province in terms of the number of events, it shows you that there is a level that is linked to urbanization that is coming up there. So the majority of the events in South Africa is floods. So we have floods as leading, followed by storms. So by storms, we would need like your winter storms, the hailstorms, the tropical cyclones. So we left the definition as set up by the international database that we have used. Droughts also occur, they cause some disasters. Heat waves did come up as well. However, there was just one event which by itself shows that we also need to have our own local data sets where we record events. I think about 5 years ago, there was a team in Oxford that actually indicated that this database that we have used tends to underestimate some of the events that are occurring basically on the whole of Africa. For example, the heat wave, we only found one which occurred in 2016, which is obviously an underestimation. I think that's one thing that we can say is a limitation of the study, the fact that there are some events that would not have been recorded in this particular database that we used.
I want to pick up on what the minister there said Dr. Bopape, that their work streams are on the ground, they are ready, they are helping people. But of course, from what people have been telling Malungelo the whole day is that there have been complaints. They feel that the government is simply not agile enough and is not servicing them perhaps as they should. Just your sense as someone who knows the system, someone who has studied this phenomenon and observed how the government has been responding, not only to this particular tragedy, but previously in places like KwaZulu-Natal.
Yeah, I think as a meteorologist, I'll just speak first from looking at the early warning systems that are in place. First, I'll say South Africa is a little bit more advanced in terms of what we are able to do. For example, we're able to run models such as numerical weather prediction models that allow us to issue warnings. We've got, for example, the South African Weather Service Act that basically speaks to the provision of weather and climate services. And then we've got the Disaster Management Act that speaks to what needs to happen. And there are formal structures in the different spheres of government that basically says, in terms of legislation, we know what to do and we know who's responsible for doing what. However, we do have challenges. I think some of those they've been mentioned by the minister in the previous interview. But then when we look at the early warning systems themselves, the UN has actually come up with 4 pillars that speak to what needs to be on the ground. I think one, it's first that we need to have the knowledge of the disaster risk. So we need to know what we're exposed to, like the issues that have already been mentioned, that people live in areas they know they are flood prone. And I mean, there are some areas, I come from Mangweng, and there's a joke that's made about some other area where they say, if you live there, you need to have a boat. So there are those areas where it's known that it's a challenge and the vulnerability is really high. Because of that exposure, the fact that the area is a floodplain. And then there is a pillar that speaks to the observations as well as the forecasts that need to be made available. In the case of the event that we saw happening now in the Eastern Cape, it occurred because of a system called a cut-off low system. There was a media release already, I think a few days before the system made landfall in Cape Town, and then we saw the system moving across the country, causing a different impact. Because it's a large system, the models were able to really pick it up, and then there were warnings. However, I think in terms of reaction or people that needed to respond to those warnings, that was just not sufficient.
But how crucial then is the need perhaps to plan, for these disasters? Do cities and towns actually do their job in terms of planning properly, providing infrastructure so as to mitigate the damage that may be caused by this phenomena?
I don't think we are doing enough. The Climate Change Act, I think you may have heard that it was signed last year in 2024. And my understanding is that it's really the first one that's coming up where, at district level, the metropolitan municipalities are now given responsibilities to do an assessment of their exposure to climate change and to then incorporate climate change in their development plans. But then I don't think that is something that was really done sufficiently in the past. So we really need to look, I think, first to ask questions around whether do we even have enough data? Do we have sufficient data on the ground to be able to inform the planning? We know the satellites are there. and then they do assist in some way. But then I think at a local level, as a country, we need to do more in terms of getting more data sets. That will then inform that local development. That will then inform development that takes into account the fact that climate change is with us, and it is here to stay. We are committed to climate change because of the amount of emissions that we have already emitted.
So we're going to leave it for now. Thank you very much, Dr. Bopape, South African Environmental Observation Network Managing Director.